I'm Ginger Annis, Alexander County Veteran Service Officer, and today I am with Herb Poole, who is a veteran of the United States Navy. Herb, tell us a little bit about yourself, when you were born and where you were born.
I was born on October 21st, 1945. Actually, I was born in Davis Hospital, but I grew up, raised in Taylorsville all my life.
Okay. And what community did you live in when you were in Taylorsville?
Out at West End, right out about half a mile past the red light out there on the right, on the Lenore Road.
Oh, okay. What did you do prior to joining the military?
I was in college. I graduated from Appalachian in 1967 and had intended to be a teacher, but after doing 3 months of student teaching and looking across that sea of empty faces, I was starting to get a little bit bored, and I decided I wanted to do a little bit something else with my life. And back in 1967, you really didn't have but two choices. You could get a job that was deferred, such as teaching, or getting married, and that wasn't no option.
Okay.
Or you could join the service, because that was at the height of the Vietnam War and everybody was getting drafted. And so Berkey Jennings and I graduated from college at the same time, and we had talked about joining the Navy, joining together. And so I joined the Navy in 1967, and as I sailed off into the sunset, there he was on the dock waving goodbye to me. So there you go.
Okay, so you actually joined, you weren't drafted?
Oh yeah, I joined. I went to Officer Candidate School, OCS, in Newport, Rhode Island.
Okay. How did you feel about the military or the war during that time?
I was kind of ambivalent about the war. I didn't have a position one way or the other, but I always felt it was my duty and obligation to serve my country.
Right.
My great-grandfather was in the military. My daddy, only man I ever knew that was drafted in World War I and drafted in World War II.
Oh, so he got both of them.
And well, he didn't actually get a chance to serve in World War I because the armistice was signed about the time that he reported to the Army base at Norfolk, Virginia. But then he was drafted in World War II and was in the Army Air Corps down in Mississippi.
Oh, okay. We said that you were in the Navy and you went to OCS. Why did you choose the Navy?
Well, it was down between the Navy and the Air Force, and the Navy had the best looking uniforms.
Okay. Well, everybody has to have a reason, so that's good. And what ship were you on, or were you on a ship, or what was your job in the Navy?
Yeah, after graduating from OCS, I was commissioned, and I was assigned as the communications officer on the USS Ingersoll, which was a destroyer based out of San Diego. And of course, about 6 weeks after reporting on that ship, we were sailing away to Vietnam. Okay.
What was the highest rank that you achieved in the military?
I was a lieutenant.
Which, I know the Navy rank is a little bit different. Tell what that is like in the Army or Air Force.
That would have been a captain in the Army or the Air Force.
Okay. And how long did you serve?
I served for about 5 years. I served from 1967 to 1972.
And tell us a little bit about what your job was on the ship.
On the first ship, the USS Ingersoll, I was the communications officer. That's a division officer. I was responsible for the all the people that were in charge of radios and any kind of communications. I was in charge of translating top secret messages that would come in. We didn't get too many of those, but and believe it or not, the machine that I used to translate those top secret messages was much like the Enigma machine used in World War II with the 5 rotors that you had to set and all that stuff. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they were still using the same basic technology that they used in World War II.
And then you said that did you serve on a different ship besides that?
Yeah, after the Ingersoll was decommissioned in 1970 because it was a World War II vintage destroyer, which I was glad to serve on because it kind of gave me a feel for what it was like to be in World War II in the Pacific. But the second ship I was on was the USS Charles F. Adams, which was a guided missile destroyer, DDG-2, and I was a department head on that ship. I was the engineering officer, and that was, of course, I had to go to school, had to go to what they called destroyer school back in those days.
Right.
It was the department head school. It lasted for about 7 months, once again back up in Newport.
What did you envision the military would be like once you joined?
It was pretty much what I envisioned it to be like. I really enjoyed being in the military. It was, give you a sense of discipline and a sense of order, and I liked that. I liked wearing the uniform.
Because it was the prettiest one.
Prettiest one. Of all the decisions I've made in my life, I think the best decision, because it was truly a decision I had to make, was joining the Navy. Because I learned a lot about it, a lot of responsibility. Like, for example, when I was off the coast of Vietnam on the Ingersoll, one of the most gratifying experiences was being qualified as officer of the deck, which means that at night, when everybody's asleep and you're running around in the darkness, either with other ships or by yourself, you're in charge. And you've got 300 people sleeping under you, and when you're 23 years old, that's a lot of responsibility.
Right.
Because only about 3 months before that, the destroyer Evans was cut in two by an aircraft carrier operating at night.
Oh,
and so it can be quite challenging.
Right. Big shoulders you had to have then.
Yes.
Do you remember anything about OCS? Were you nervous, excited? Were they rough on you, or?
Well, everything went so fast that you really didn't have a chance to be nervous or excited. The main thing about OCS, I was just really looking forward to being commissioned. You just wanted to get it over with as soon as possible.
Right.
But looking back on it, I wish I would have enjoyed it more, because you really built some tight camaraderie with all the other officer candidates there, because you were all thrown in together in the same group. You know, you got your head shaved and you had to march around, but you got to do a lot of different things. I mean, everything from basic seamanship to knowing what block and tackles were and how to tie knots from the master chiefs to engineering classes, to weapons classes, learning about steam propulsion and how the engineering plant works, how to do tactics on maneuvering board to get from point A to point B while maneuvering. It was just challenging and really a lot of fun, a lot of practical knowledge that I got out of it.
Do you remember any of your instructors, or do any of them stand out as something special, or maybe not so special?
I can remember some of the instructors. I can't remember some of them's names, but I do remember the chief that was over us, the master chief, Chief Borkowski. He would always come surprise inspections, because you could not be in the rack during non-sleeping hours.
Right.
And the bed covers had ridges on them, and if you were laying there, it would leave an imprint on the side of your face. So even though he wouldn't catch you when you heard he was coming, and you were out in the passageway, he could see if you had marks on your face.
They probably did that on purpose.
Yeah. And you would get gigs, and if you got so many gigs, you had to stay in on Saturday and march instead of going on liberty.
Right.
I never did have to do that, but that was fun. And then, of course, I can remember the lieutenant that was over our company. It was Lieutenant Mellon. But all in all, they were all good people, very motivated, and I look back on it now and enjoyed the experience.
What was your most memorable experience when you were in the Navy?
Well, there were a lot of them. Off the coast of Vietnam, when we operated in Vietnam, our ship had three main duties over there. One was plane guard duty, which is following a carrier around when they were doing flight operations. And they had two areas that they did flight operations. One was called Dixie Station, which was down around off the coast of Saigon, and the other one was Yankee Station, which was up near the DMZ. And we always operated at Yankee Station. And the job of doing plane guard duty was to ensure that if a pilot had to bail out, or if there was a crash or something happened, that we would be available to rescue them. And we did have to pick up a pilot one time, and one time an aircraft, I think it was an A4, couldn't release their bombs, and so you can't land on a carrier with the bomb still in the rack.
Right.
So pilot had to bail out, and of course the chopper picked him up, but we had to go and get the 50 caliber machine guns out and shoot up what was left of the plane floating, so nobody could get any parts on it. But that was the doing the plane guard duty, and it was kind of neat because you could listen to the flight operations on the radio, listen to them talking them in, and being on the ball and hitting the deck and things like that. The second basic, we would rotate. One ship would rotate from plane guard duty to another duty, and one of our second duties was gunfire support for the Marines operating around Hue and the DMZ. In other words, the Marines would be operating, and they would call in and say, we need some rounds dropped here, and they would give us the coordinates. And of course, we had 5-inch guns, and that's what we would use to support the Marines. And then at night, we did what's called harassment and interdiction fire. And we would just fire at random to different places that they would give us to shoot to try to keep the enemy's head down so the Marines could get a little rest at night. Now, I did not like that because you did not know when the gun was going to go off. And if you were on the bridge, and they always fired Mount 52, which was only about 20 feet from where the bridge was, the end of the muzzle, because nobody ever wanted to fire around Mount 52, and you had to get the wear and all the guns equal. So because they didn't want to fire 52, that's the one we had to fire to try to get the rounds, the wear in the barrel to be equal. And so, that gun might go off every 15 seconds, or it might go off every 5 minutes. It was just like slapping you across the side of the face. Because we didn't have earplugs back then. We didn't have nothing, So I didn't particularly care for that. And then the third operation we really did was interdiction of forces from North Vietnam. They would try to send small crafts down the coast around the DMZ to bring weapons and arms or men. And I can remember one specific operation. It was on Halloween night, 1968, where we were tracking 5 what they call waterborne logistics craft, and we were operating with the cruiser Canberra. And of course, we were a destroyer. We could get in a lot closer, and we started tracking them on radar, and then we started making a mad dash and open fire, and we got pretty close to the coast of North Vietnam, shooting up those boats, and that was one of the most exciting things that I had in Vietnam. Now the other area that didn't have anything to do with Vietnam, but it's a memorable experience, was on my second ship, the Charles F. Adams. We were having a missile exercise down off the coast of Puerto Rico, and we didn't shoot missiles very often. Because they cost $250,000 a piece. So, and all the time that I was on the Charles F. Adams, I think we only shot 2. So when we shot it, everybody came topside to watch the missile go off and see if it could hit the target and things like that.
Right.
Well, I was in the bridge, and there was a whole lot of people on the flying bridge, which was, say, the roof or the overhead of the regular bridge. They were standing up there in the open area. Well, we fired the missile, and the missile went awry. And it just started going up, straight up. Well, then it turned around and started coming straight down. And it would come down like it was going to go off the port side, and you could hear all the people on top running to the starboard side.
Right.
Well, then it would come down towards the starboard side, and you could hear them all up there running back over to the port side. And it was almost like a cartoon character, as you could hear. Well, that missile hit on the port side into the water. About 20 seconds later, it came out of the water on the starboard side and went back up into the air and finally crashed. And of course, it was a solid fuel rocket, so there was nothing that could put it out until it ran out of fuel or exploded.
Right.
And that was one of my most memorable experiences.
Yeah, I bet your blood pressure went up just a little.
I was down in the pilot house, so it didn't bother me too much as the people were exposed.
Oh, mercy. Did your ship ever come under attack, like a direct attack or anything?
No.
Okay.
No.
What weapons were you assigned to as an officer in the Navy?
On the first ship, I was a communications officer, and during general quarters, I was in what's called Combat Information Center, and I was responsible for looking at the electronic warfare equipment, which monitored fire control radars of the enemy, so to speak.
Right.
In other words, every gun that was trained on you or every missile that had you locked on would have a different signature. And it was my job to monitor that to make sure that we weren't locked on by anybody else.
Right.
Now, when I first reported to the Ingersoll, I'd been on there about 2 days, and we got underway, first time I'd ever been underway, for a training exercise off the coast of San Clemente Island. And they assigned me to be the check site observer in Mount 54. Well, I didn't have any idea what the check site observer was, because that's the first time I'd even been on a ship. And so the XO said, you just go back there to the gun mount, and the gun captain will tell you what to do. And he said, well, you just get up here and stand on this little platform, and you look in that little telescope there, and if you see anything in there that we shouldn't be shooting at, you just holler out, check fire. Otherwise, that's all you need to worry about.
Okay.
And so, of course, we were tracking a sleeve that was being pulled by a plane, and I could see the sleeve in that thing, and all of a sudden, the mount started swinging out to port, and here come a round of powder up from the powder room and below, and the guy grabs it and then slams it in the breech, and then here comes up the shell out of the powder room, and he slams it in the breech. I said, oh my God, we're going to blow up before we even get a chance to shoot. And then about a few seconds later, the gun went off, and all thing I could see in that check site was this big ball of fire, and I could swear we blew the end of the barrel off. Of course, everything was, okay.
Right.
But that was my only experience with guns. Other than that, and of course, when I was on the second ship, Charles F. Adams, my responsibility during general quarters was down in main control to monitor all the engine situations.
Right. What was everyday life like on the ship?
Well, kind of boring, believe it or not, at sea, because you stood watch. You had usually you stood 4 hours of watch, and then you were off 8. Of course, if you were off 8 and at night, you got to sleep. If it's off 8 during the day, you had to do your regular job, whatever you had to do. And for an officer, it was like paperwork, inspections, meetings, things like that. On the second ship, we were deployed with the NATO force, which was 7 other ships. And so when we were transiting from one port to another, we could do exercises, just maneuvering and just do whatever you wanted to do. So usually it wasn't just steaming from one place to the other. So it was kind of interesting because you could, do different types of maneuvers and things like that to keep interested.
Right. Was the food good, and did you have enough to eat?
Very good. That was one of the pluses in being in the Navy. And I can remember on my first ship especially, I always looked forward to curry. Now most people think Indian curry, but we had Filipino stewards, and they were our cooks, so to speak. But they made wonderful Indian curry and had all kinds of condiments and things like that. And of course we had ice cream for dessert every day. And if you're really good, you got 2 scoops.
Oh.
And off the coast of Vietnam, of course, today's Navy and the Navy when I was in it is totally different. Today's Navy, you can send an email to your wife immediately. You can watch TV via satellite. I mean, it's almost like being in home port.
Right.
But when we were off the coast of Vietnam, there was no communication back with the United States at all. It usually took about 3 weeks for a letter to get from Taylorsville to the Pacific. And so movies were one of the big highlights. And we'd get various movies. You'd set up a projector in the wardroom, and of course the enlisted people would have their projector in the mess decks, and the chiefs would have their movie back in the chiefs' quarters. But I can remember the 2 movies that we got most. Every week there would be 1 or 2 series of these. Would be Star Trek, the old Star Trek, or Mission Impossible.
Okay.
And I can hear the Star Trek theme today, and it still reminds me of Vietnam, being off the coast of Vietnam,
Right.
watching those Star Trek movies.
Did you have, as an officer, did you have your own quarters by yourself, or did you actually have to share the quarters?
Well, each officer was assigned to a stateroom, and depending upon what your rank was depending on how many people were in that stateroom. When I first reported on the Ingersoll, there were 3 officers in one stateroom, in the stateroom I was in. But pretty quick, it was down to 2, and typically it's 2 officers in one stateroom.
Okay.
If you're the executive officer, you've got a stateroom by yourself, and if you're the CO, of course, you've got the stateroom by yourself. But everybody else, usually, it's 2 officers to one stateroom.
Okay. And you said that for a letter, it would take 3 weeks to get from there to home or home to there.
Yes.
Is that how you kept in touch? Is
Yes.
just by letters? Did you ever get phone calls home or anything like that?
No phone calls.
No phone calls.
No phone calls. Only letters.
Okay.
And Daddy would send me the Terrible Times every now and then.
Which was very interesting, I'm sure, for
Oh,
you
yes.
at that time,
That's
just to
right.
keep up with home. How did you handle being away from home and family?
Well, I wasn't married and I was single, and I looked on it as a big adventure, and it was. I mean, you know, we went to Japan, we went to Hong Kong, we went to Taiwan, the Philippines, Hawaii, Midway, Guam, I mean, all over the Pacific. We went to Vancouver in Canada for a week jaunt up there, just training exercise, quote unquote. And then on my second ship, the Charles F. Adams, that was based out of Mayport, Florida. Like I said before, we were assigned to the NATO force. Well, our prime mission other than training was diplomatic. So we would go to one port after another port after another port, and we would go to the embassies and have receptions and parties and whatnot. So we went all over the Caribbean, from Jamaica to the Virgin Islands to Puerto Rico, up the East Coast, Canada, all over the Mediterranean, Greece, Turkey, Portugal, Scotland, England, everywhere. I counted up after we got through, there were 72 receptions that I went to in those 6 months, and I didn't want to have a drink for next 6 months. But it was an adventure, and I mean, and I guess the highlight of the NATO was when we were in London. The ship went up the Thames River, and we docked at Greenwich, right beside the Cutty Sark, the sailing ship. And one day the XO came in and said, "I need 2 volunteers." Well, you know what you do when somebody asks you to volunteer in the Navy, you take 1 step backwards. Well, it just so happens that I was on duty that day and there wasn't that many officers around, so I got nominated. So me and another officer said, "You have to go to a luncheon today." And said, "Fine." And so the British picked us up, because one of the British ships was part of the task force, so we were friendly with some of the Brits, so they picked us up, and we went to this club in downtown London for a reception, and of course the guest of honor was Princess Margaret, and so I guess I've got nowhere to go but downhill from there.
There you go. So during all your travels and stuff, did you have time to actually tour the places that you
yes.
were? And
Yes.
so you were actually able to see a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, when we went to various ports, I mean, part of the reason to go into those ports was give the people a break, let them be able to see the local sites and meet the people. So
Right.
we got to see quite a bit, yeah.
Very good. Did you receive any awards or decorations for your time in the military?
I received the Navy Achievement Award for service in Vietnam, and of course the regular Vietnam medals that everybody
Right.
else received for working in that theater of war.
Okay. Do you still have any of your uniforms or photos, mementos, or anything like that of your time in service?
Yeah, I've got a lot of photos, and I still have my dress blues.
And you actually can get in them as well, because I think you sent me a picture.
Yeah, I saved 2 sets of my dress blues, and 1 set I donated to the Alexander County Ancestral Association, and the other set I kept to be buried in.
Okay. What was it like after the war, or when you came home? Does anything stand out in your mind?
Well, the thing that stands out most is how people just kind of forgot about it, had no appreciation of at that time, of the people who served, and most people who got out wanted to forget about it.
Right.
and just get on with their lives. I would have made a career in the Navy had I not gotten married. And also at that time, people didn't have much respect for the people in the military.
Right.
I mean, you didn't see people wearing their uniforms around like you did during World War II out in the civilian world. You wore your uniform if you were on base or working, but other than that, you were in civilian clothes. It was just a different time. People were sick of it, and that's all I got to say about that.
Did you come back to Taylorsville, or did you go somewhere else when you got out of the military?
Well, indirectly, when I decided to get out of the military, of course, I started looking around for a job. And since I had to have somewhere to live, my wife and I, we came back to my home here in Taylorsville and stayed with my mom and dad. And I looked around and got a job with Invasion Corporation as an insurance adjuster. And that they were headquartered out of Winston-Salem. And they assigned, after going through training, they assigned me a territory based out of Statesville. So I just kind of lucked out and got 20 miles from my hometown.
Right. Now, did you meet your wife while you were serving in the military?
Yes.
Did you meet her somewhere away, or?
When I was in destroyer school, or department head school, back in Newport in 1970, Newport, Rhode Island, that's where I met her. 'Cause she's from Massachusetts.
Okay. And so you got married before you got out of the military?
Yes.
Okay. What about children?
Got one child, Rick. He's in the Navy, been in the Navy for 21 years, never seen the ocean. He's a corpsman, and he's been everywhere. He's been stationed in Guantanamo, he's been stationed in Korea, been stationed in Puerto Rico, served a tour of duty in Iraq, served a tour of duty in Iran, and he just finished his first segment of PA school, and he graduated from the University of Nebraska with a BS in medical science, and he's going through the second half of his degree in PA school at San Diego at Balboa Hospital, and he'll be commissioned next February.
So he's been enlisted all these years, and now he's getting his commission.
Right, he's a chief petty officer now, and he'll be commissioned next February. We're real proud of him.
Absolutely, that is certainly something to be proud of. So since leaving the military, you worked at Invasion as an insurance rep, and then did you retire from there, or did you?
No, I worked there for about 3 years, and while I was at Invasion, they sent me to a building training, to how to assess damage to buildings based on fire and wind and things like that. So I got exposed to the building business, and I had always been kind of interested in that. And so a fellow I knew in Statesville, and we had been in school together, Rick Dyson, we formed a partnership and started building homes as a construction company. And so I worked as a general contractor for about 5 years. And of course, by the end of the 70s, the interest rates had got up to 18, 19%.
Right.
It's pretty hard to make money in the building business with mortgages that high and construction loans that high. So I started looking around for another job, and Berkey Jennings clued me into a position with Bell South, or it was Southern Bell at that time.
Right.
And so I got a job with Southern Bell, and I worked there for 25 years and retired from Bell South in 2005.
Okay. Did your training that you had in the Navy, did that assist you when you were in your different jobs that you were doing?
Yes. The biggest thing, it assisted me, and it gave you confidence. It taught you leadership. And I think that was the biggest thing, giving me self-confidence and leadership skills.
Right.
And I think people looked at those things.
Right. What would you say to the youth today that if they were interested in the military?
Study. Get smart. Because back in my day, if you got in trouble, they'd send you to the military. Today, you can't get in the military unless you're almost in perfect health.
Right.
And you can do very, very well on the ASVAB test that they give you, because they're very selective about who they take, because on most of the ships today, there used to be the deck crew made up about 20% of the force, because it took a lot of work to take care of the hull and the superstructure and painting and chipping and all that stuff. Well, the coatings that they put on the ships today don't need that kind of maintenance.
Right.
And plus, all the equipment on the ships today are very high tech. Takes a lot of skilled labor to be able to run them. And so study, 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 and you'll go far.
Okay. Do you have anything else you would like to say or you would like to share?
No, going back again, I think the most important decision I ever made in my life was joining the Navy, and never had any regrets, and I got a lot more out of it than I ever put into it, I think.
Right. Now, are you a member or involved in any of the local veteran service organizations here in the county?
Yes, I'm a member of Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 5466, and I currently serve as a quartermaster.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to share?
No, that's about it.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for your service and thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.